like fine with sitting and listening to most of that. Like the majority of the stuff I kind of wanted to comment on is like the parallels between the book and COVID and then racism. And
Yeah, I mean, look, Shan, I think you're brilliant. So I'm like, you ask the questions that you deem appropriate. Normal people, as in people who are not me, don't spend $400+ a year buying books on history because it's like, oh, I didn't know that. So normal people don't do that. Y'all are normal. So the link for Facebook, I don't know. It's because I'm doing all this for the first time. Hi Facebook. Hi everybody. Um,
All right, folks, I'm going to go mute and have the camera down. I'll be monitoring, but I will be hanging out quietly back here.
Yeah, Pete, I appreciate it, man. Again, I'm sorry about Sabrina, but we'll talk.
All right. Have a good interview.
Thanks, guys. All right, so we're just standing by waiting for him. Everybody has to be admitted based off the new security stuff that they put in the Zoom. So when he logs in, we'll see him right away. I'll do the traditional, intro up, and there he is.
How exciting.
Oh, excellent. Oh, good. Hey, everybody.
Hey, Mr. Brooks. We were just talking about you.
Oh, what a coincidence that you're here.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you back. Well, everybody, went back once again for another episode of Pop Culture Uncovered. We have the incredible honor to be able to sit down and talk to the New York Times best-selling author, Max Brooks, of World War Z and the Rainier Sasquatch Massacre. Which, for the record, I'll tell you now, we all really wanted to try to sit and read that and cover that today too. So we're basically going to have to be like, so when you're not working on a couple thousand other projects, we'd love to have you come back and talk about that too, because I think everybody really enjoyed reading World War Z. And in my case, I'll tell you, I read it for the second time and I took away a lot more from it the second read through than I did the first. But first, let me introduce, my talented co-hosts. I have Megan, the incomparable, and Shan, the brilliant. So I mean, first things first, you had some exciting news for us last time about the Harlem Hellfighters, and I know you had some updates. So I figured first we'd give the floor to you to kind of let us know what's going on.
Okay, well, the last time we spoke, I told you that I was trying to work on converting my graphic novel, Harlem Hellfighters, into an audio drama, like a good old-fashioned radio drama. And over the course of that interview, it was Megan who asked me. She said, look, I know, and it was a great way she asked me. She could be a diplomat at the UN. She said, look, I know that women didn't fight necessarily in the war, but there had to have been women in this conflict. Do you plan to include the roles of women? And I didn't forget that. I woke up the next morning thinking about it, and I never forgot it. And I thought, you know what? There has to be these stories. I just haven't found them. So I dug and I dug and I dug, and I found 2 colored women in World War I France, Addie W. Hunton and Catherine M. Johnson. And here's the best part. This is the story of 2 women with the YWCA who served in France. And the best part about this book is it's written by them. And that's the thing, is when you're the study of history, the problem with history too often is historians, and they can't help but sort of put their spin on whatever decade they live in, trying to judge these people. So if you're lucky to get their words, the actual people who lived it, it's an amazing story. And so I've read it, and I am including and they knew the Harlem Hellfighters. So I didn't have to fictionalize. So I am including them. And Megan, that's thanks to you. So thank you for pushing me in that direction, because I probably would not have found them.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh, I'm going to put that in my biography of my life. Well, my autobiography. I will say that, and that I am like one of your most influential people in your life.
I'll take it.
Yeah, Megan, just remember, I'm absolutely going to be like, every time I have to give you a motivational speech, I'm going to be like, hey, you helped the New York Times bestselling author improve a project. So the next time next time I tell you you need to write a book or do something, I don't want to hear any arguments because we've already seen how good you are.
Exactly. I'm gonna put that's gonna be on my business card. Consultant to Max Brooks, but you know.
Oh man, well, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, look, I really look forward because the Harlem Hellfighters are so sorely underreported and underrepresented. Even in the African American Smithsonian, they have a very, very, very small section, and so I do hope that that there's going to be greater attention to them because I really do think that, look, it's a really powerful story, and loved every bit of it, and would just love. I mean, I haven't had a chance to do the backtracking to read any of the books that you recommended yet, but I'm working my way there. But amazing stuff. So one of the things we wanted to ask you was that there seemed to be some common themes between your projects, and it's specifically kind of like horror and kind of like whether it's fictionalized or, the real horrors like in the First World War with the Harlem Hellfighters. We were just curious, what makes that an attractive storytelling vehicle for you?
For me, there's nothing more primal than fear. It's our most primal instinct. The reason we are alive as a species is because our fear managed to have a nice working relationship with our curiosity. When we were just starting to walk upright and we said, oh, look at that snake, let's pet it. And then the other side of our brain said, let's poke it with a stick first before we actually reach out our hand. And so fear is not a bad thing if it can be managed. And that's what drives me is how do we deal with fear? How do we deal with crisis? I think the theme of all my books, I mean, even the Minecraft books, is adaptation, right? Here we are. Here's how we do things. Here's our comfort zone. And then, here comes something new, a new situation, a new crisis, and we crash into it. And the only way to get to the other side is to adapt and become a different person. And that could be individuals, that could be groups of people. And in the case of World War Z, that's an entire planet.
I think that's amazing. I guess I can see it. I can see the reason why you say that easier now, because World War Z very much ties into like the George Romero Night of the Living Dead kind of, which I will just say, and before I kick this to Megan and Shan, one of the things that I really appreciated reading it back through it again, we've gotten to a point with zombies where now it's about the gore. And I feel like you do an amazing job through the course of the book of, we're really not talking about the zombies. We're focusing on the people who are trying to survive it and the socio-political and economic and cultural and political ramifications of all of it, which for the record, I would say, I would love to sit in one of your classes because I would love to hear a full-throated explanation of how you came up with the Holy Russian Empire and all, like, because I'm a political science major. So all you said you had all the gears in my brain turning. But before I dominate the conversation, Megan, I know you had some questions that you wanted to ask.
I mean, I do have a ton of questions, but I'm not going to dominate the conversation, obviously. But I mean, it's, when you said that about fear, you actually, you put that into the novel. One of the characters was discussing on how fear is our most primal instinct. It really drives us to do the things that we do. Because I feel I'm obviously you've wrote the book, so you can tell me, but I believe it was the character that came up with the false vaccine. And he's saying that, like, why do we want the things that we want? It's not because we think that we need them. It's because it's the fear of missing out. It's, I need this thing because if I don't have this thing, I won't be able to do X, Y, and Z. And that really sat with me for a long time because it's like, it's really, really, really true. And it goes to the heart of like information in general. It's, we don't know what we know simply because that's true and it makes sense. It's because we trust the person telling us. And I remember when I first learned that and I had to sit with that and I was like, that's really crazy because somebody who could be your mortal enemy could be telling you the complete truth, and somebody who could have been your nanny for 15 years, they tell you a lie, you're believing your nanny. So, it's just funny how that works. So that was really interesting that you put that in the book, and I had to sit with that. That was one of the many points that I had to sit with.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, because that's amazing. So, I mean, I have a bunch of questions, so I'll just start with one.
Oh.
And for me, I want to start with, so you've written this novel, obviously you yourself, you were the passive interviewer, it was lightly edited, of course, for clarity and things like that. But I wanted to know, why did you choose to use yourself as the passive interviewer rather than choosing a different person, creating a whole nother character, anybody? Why did you put yourself into it in that particular role?
It's funny you say that, because technically it's not me. Technically, I tried to make myself, I guess it is me, but I tried to make whoever the interviewer is invisible. And the funny thing is, I actually had to go to the Writers Guild and argue on behalf of the screenwriter of the movie that same point, because they had many writers on the movie. And the first one was J. Michael Straczynski, Babylon 5. But then the other writers came in and he was going to be cut out of the credits. So I had to go and argue that the Jerry Lane character of Brad Pitt, that's not me, and that has nothing to do with me, and that's not in the book. So I literally had to go to the Writers Guild and read the initial passage in the book of saying, I tried to make myself as invisible as possible. And I got that from the book that I based World War Z on. Because World War Z is based on a real book. When I was looking to do a big zombie story, because the whole point of doing World War Z was I wanted to tell a big story. What always frustrated me about zombie stories was the zombie crisis is so big, but the stories they're telling is so teeny. I had questions about the world, because in every zombie story, they're like, oh, I wonder what the government's doing. Yeah, me too. I wonder what they're doing. But how do you tell a story that big? When I was a kid, my mother gave me an audio book. And we can talk about this later. I don't know if we discussed this before. I'm very dyslexic, so audiobooks are really important to me. She gave me an audiobook called The Good War by Studs Terkel. And it's an oral history of the Second World War, in which this journalist, Studs Terkel, went around and interviewed people from all over the world about how World War II affected them. And he hit everybody. What was it like to be a Russian or a German or French? What was it like to be a Black guy in the US Army, and talked about a race riot? What was it like to be gay in the Marines on Iwo Jima? You really get a sense of how big this war was. And I thought, okay, that's my template. I'm going to do an oral history of the zombie war and pull in people like Studs Terkel. And in the beginning of it, he says, I'm trying to be as invisible as possible. So that's where it came from.
Well, that's perfect, because I was literally going to ask you. I looked at the dedications and I was like, Studs Terkel. I was like, a person I didn't think. I was like, George Romero. I was like, yeah, I thought that made sense. But no, that's brilliant. But I mean, I think that's part of the strength of the book itself too, is that there's a lot of historical references, and I feel like for people who love history, references to stuff like the hostage rescue in Entebbe. I mean, there are all kinds of things that I feel like that you pepper into the course of the book to really ground it, so that it's, if you know history, it really, it adds that much more. If you don't, it doesn't detract from the story. But before I go into my next question, Shane, you haven't asked a question yet, so go ahead.
Well, I'm just since we're on the topic of history, I'm glad that Armand said that for the people who are not history buffs, it didn't detract from anything. I felt like it was very easy for me to follow along with, and it actually piqued my interest into a lot of different historical events, a lot of different places that I had never heard of. The whole time I was reading it, I constantly found myself Googling locations. I wanted to see I can't remember the name of the statue. It's the Motherland statue. When you were talking about having her sword and shield raised, I started Googling that. I Googled all of the castles. I can't remember the character's name who was talking about the importance of castles pre-war, like, and even I think it was World War II he was talking about. And it made me like go look up all these different places that he was mentioning. So I think even though it's not necessarily a historical text, that is something that's still a really great like teaching tool. It draws a lot of interest to those things.
Thank you. You know, what I want to do someday, I've been asked this a lot by history teachers, is will I ever publish an annotated World War Z, where half the book is the book, you know, is the actual book, but then a whole other group of everything that inspired me. Because like you said, everything is based on something true. And part of that is my interest in history. Part of that's also my own insecurity, because I want to be able to justify everything I do. So if somebody says that would never happen, I want to be able to say, no, it actually already has. Like the Battle of Yonkers in the book is very critical. And how does a modern mechanized army with all this firepower totally get wailed on by a supposedly inferior foe? Well, I based that on a real battle called Isan Luana in South Africa, where Queen Victoria's army met the Zulu army head on. And you think on paper, no contest. You know, the British had 50 caliber rifles and rockets and cannons. They had everything. And the Zulus had little stubby spears. So it should have been a slaughter, and it was for the British. Chelmsford's army was surrounded by the Zulus and utterly massacred. And so when I started to study that battle, I thought, oh, well, firepower and technology, that's like a slice of the pie. There's organization, there's morale, there's communication, there's the terrain. There's so much that goes into fighting a battle. And I thought, okay, there's my template for Yonkers.
I think my favorite part about the Battle of Yonkers in the book, there seems to be a lot of focus on the fact that it didn't seem like the leadership missed all those things about the battle. They weren't unaware of the terrain or the enemy that they were fighting or anything, but it was all about the image of the battle. And because they were so focused on how things were going to look, that's why things turned out the way they did. I thought that was really important, and I like the fact that that it was talked about, because I feel like that's why a lot of things tend to go awry when it comes to government and, you know, all sorts of other institutions, is because people are more focused on how whatever the event is itself is going to look and how they're going to look on the other side of it.
Yeah, the optics are really important, and that the idea of massing your army for the cameras so it'll look good. I got that from Desert Storm, because that was the first war where the US government said, we're going to flip it, because they were still stung over Vietnam, the idea that cameras were there capturing all of this. So I thought, well, we're going to flip it, and we're going to invite this brand new news medium called CNN, and we're going to show them how much ass we can kick. And that's what I came up with. The idea is it's going to be like Desert Storm, where we're going to mass our tanks and our artillery, and we're going to show the world, hey, we can do this. Oops.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I enjoyed the most, well, I guess before I get to the question, I should say, for anybody who's looking for additional information about the Zulus, there's a great movie by the name of Zulu Dawn, which is actually fantastic movie, absolutely fantastic. And there's also a really wonderful book. It's called The Zulus at War.
Yes.
Also, I think it's The Tribe That Washed Their Spears. But
the washing of the spears.
Yes. So, see, this is why I love whenever we have you on the show, because somehow inevitably you and I have ended up reading the same books. So I get a chance to geek out on an entirely different level. But going back to the Battle of Yonkers, one of the things that I thought was fantastic in terms of you making an effort to ground everything in fact, I actually looked at the Battle of Yonkers from an entirely different perspective. I saw the First World War. I saw the Civil War in terms of the technology had evolved and the strategies hadn't. Because what I really loved as you get to later on in the book is that what was needed was creativity and flexibility and thought, not technology. And so I thought that was what was so kind of compelling. And it was the human element. Our technology wasn't going to be the thing that saved us. Our ability to support each other and work cooperatively together and to be able to do something different than what we had done before mattered. And so that's why I think the book works so well, because since it is grounded in fact, you bring the facts that are familiar to you to the story. Does that make sense?
It's funny you said that's the exact lecture I give at West Point to the cadets, which is the history of war. A lot of people die unnecessarily in war because the generals and admirals, the people in charge, came of age at a different time. So their brains are still stuck in when they were in their 20s, but the technology changes, the tactics changes, but they haven't changed. So like in World War I, just like you said, these generals came of age in fighting Napoleon or fighting colonial wars, and they could not adapt to the new science. And you read about this in every war. I mean, in World War II, we fought these naval battles off Guadalcanal. We had radar the Japanese didn't. So you would have assumed in a night battle, we could see in the dark, no contest. But the admirals in charge didn't know how to deal with radar. It was brand new, it was a weird contraption-y thing. So they put the ships with radar in the back instead of in the front. And every night the Japanese would sail down in the middle of the night and just blow us out of the water.
Yeah, now I wanted to shift to talking about the challenge of working on this project, because I think, right, because I say this and I stress that I'm not giving false praise. I think this is one of the best technical achievements in writing that I've read in a long time. And the reason why is because it is one thing to write characters from different cultures in a third person perspective. It is entirely different to sit and write those characters from a first person perspective. And I'll put it like this, because I don't come from all those different cultures, I can't profess to to how accurate you were. But the thing that was evident was how much you cared, because you could have told a very stereotypical story about Japan. And what I loved was the direction that you took. So can you just tell us a little bit of just, the challenge of doing the research for, Japan, South Africa, Russia, the United States, Europe. And look, the whole commentary from the guy with the castles about, oh, you guys are a young country and we had fortifications. That's such a uniquely, I've only encountered that attitude from people who are from like Paris and London, where they might live in an apartment building that's from the 1700s. So if you could just kind of just share with us, just your experience of doing the research to write.
The research for me is what took up most of the work. And for me, there's two types of research. There's cosmetic research, which I don't have to worry about till the end. Like in the Ukraine, like I don't need to know the nickname of a fighter bomber until the end. So I just put in a group of X's in my first draft and I just go. But then there's a kind of research that really does determine which way things go. And when it comes to cultural research, I tried to be as accurate as possible by going into the diversity within the diversity. And I think that was sort of my emotional compass needle, was I know how people feel when their whole group is lumped into one category. Well, you're all from this group, therefore you all must feel a certain way. And I think what I try to do was talk about the diversity within each group. Like in India, light-skinned Indians, not all of them, but there is a prejudice of some light-skinned Indians for darker-skinned Indians. So I try to talk about that. In Japan, I wanted to talk about a Japanese kid who'd grown up during World War II, as opposed to a Japanese kid who'd grown up in the 90s. Those are two different countries. South Africa, what is post-apartheid South Africa? And so some of it was from book learning. Some of it was from actually going to these countries. I've been to South Africa. I've been to the Caribbean. I've been to Russia. I've been to the Ukraine. I've been to school in the Czech Republic. Some of it was through other studies, like the Rediker Plan, the idea of the South African plan. That came from a real documentary I watched when I was 13 about apartheid in 1984, where they showed us kids our age, white kids, all being taught how to shoot, because it was understood in the Afrikaner community, eventually the 14 million Black people would rise up against the 3 million white people. So you all are going to have to learn how to shoot. And I thought, to grow up in that level of paranoia, if anybody is going to come up with that kind of a crazy plan, it's got to be a white South African guy who'd grown up basically waiting for the world to come for him. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, that's the nut of my Rediker plan. But also, like in South Africa, I wanted to talk about the difference between like Nelson Mandela's group, which is the Xhosa, and the Zulus. You're not going to find oil and water more than the Xhosa and the Zulus. And so, like, that's why I wanted to have the defense minister of South Africa was a Zulu. So his attitude is just like, fight, crush them. And Nelson Mandela is like, well, no, wait a minute. Let's think strategically here. Like, I wanted to talk about the difference between the East Germans and the West Germans. And that was important because I've met both. And I understand how the West Germans, they've grown up with this sense of guilt because they were taught as kids, you did this. This is on you. Whereas the East Germans were taught, no, you're all communists. You weren't Nazis. So the East Germans didn't have the sense of guilt, shame, and also, hey, we got to make personal choices. So I just tried to go layer after layer after layer. You always get pushback. The biggest argument I ever got was online over Queen Elizabeth, the castle one. Because the British are divided into two categories, some of which who still love their queen and are very patriotic, and the other, which is so embarrassed that they have these essentially Chuck E. Cheese characters that they pay to stay in office. And they get in it. And you should have seen the fight. It was unbelievable. It was like, we don't believe in that anymore. And then someone else will write in like, are you daft? When Queen Diana died, we lost our minds. And they just tore into each other. And I was just like, okay, mission accomplished.
Yeah, that's the magic of the internet for you. Just when you think you couldn't find another argument, there it is. Before I kick it to Shannon, I do have to ask one thing since you've already raised it. The Redeker plan.
Yes.
Okay. The morality. I mean, look.
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated by, by every facet of it. Because most places, whenever we're doing a monster movie, the goal is always, well, we got to save everybody. How do we save everybody? And so I don't think I had read anything contemporary where it was just like, well, no, we're only going to be able to save some people. And we need to figure, and again, going back to history, I was just actually watching a documentary about Stalingrad. And it very much kind of reminded me of that, because it's like, Stalin made a conscious choice to leave Stalingrad with citizens in it because he knew the soldiers would fight harder if they had to defend a living city as opposed to one that had been evacuated. So if you could kind of just go into, your thought process behind the morality and ethics of the Redeker plan, and then how it was adopted by every nation that was, kind of still functional.
That's so funny you said Stalingrad, because those were my two points, was South Africa and the Soviet Union. So I took that South African idea, but I mated it with the Soviet Union retreat to the Ural Mountains. 1941, the Nazis invade. They have to pick up and go. I mean, we're talking, they picked up factories and disassembled them and put them in trucks and just went. But Stalin was so brutal, he said, well, I've got to leave pockets of soldiers and civilians in the path of the Germans to slow them down. I'm trading space for time. And it worked. It's brutal and horrible, but it worked. So I wanted to say, if humanity was pushed to that limit, that's what they would have to do. And that's what people do in a crisis. And I hate to say it, but I think in the next 10 years, a lot of really dark stuff is going to come out about COVID, about hospitals stacking up with bodies, and about hospital staff having to make decisions about who goes on a ventilator and who doesn't, and who gets PPE and who doesn't. Because we were really caught. And I think, a lot of it's been swept under the rug because we're kind of still in it. We're winning the war, but the war's not over. But I think, our children and grandchildren are going to have a reckoning about how really desperate this was. And so that was my guiding light for the Redeker plan. And I will also say, boy, did it get taken out of context, because the Redeker plan, when the economy melted down in 2008, some weird right-wingers started quoting me. When Obama was like, we gotta bail out the banks, we gotta bail out the auto industry. And they were like, no, let him die. Just like the book World War Z, the Redeker plan. We need a Redeker plan. I'm like, no. It's kind of like this guy, Michael Lewis, he wrote the book Liar's Poker about his time on Wall Street, and he meant it as an indictment. He meant it to say, this is horrible, we shouldn't act this way. But all these young douchebags coming out of business school read it as a how-to book. And he was like, that's not what I meant. So that's what kind of happened to me with the Redeker plan.
Well, I thought it was a brilliant touch, because I just feel like again, there's a temptation with these stories to look for a happy ending where everything works out well. And I enjoyed the fact that it was very much based more in reality. But because I am dominating the conversation, Shan, let's go to you for a second. What questions did you have?
So I'm kind of glad that we just started touching on COVID, because the entire time I was reading this book, I was like, I cannot believe that this book was published pre-COVID. Like it just, yeah, there were so many parallels. And like, I feel, especially when it came to the Redeker plan, when it came to all the racism that was attached to the zombies, like them calling it the African rabies and, you know, all these different things. I'm like, how is it not about COVID? How is it possible that this book came out before? So I guess I want to know, since you wrote it, and obviously far before COVID, like, how do you feel now, like thinking back on the things that you wrote and then seeing what's happening in the world today? Like, are you fearful that there might be more instances like you said you just had with the Redeker plan, with the right-wing people kind of using it as a how-to? Do you think there's any danger of that sort of thing happening again, or do you feel like some of the things that were coming out in the book, you actually just answered that. You said you feel like a lot of things are going to come out about the way COVID was handled too. So yeah, I just want to know how you feel about all of that.
You know, Shan, I learned at a very, very early age, much earlier than I should have, that people don't believe something can happen until it already has. You know, when I was a kid, I was about 12 or 13. I went to this school that couldn't afford school buses. So they used to walk us to the park. It was about 3 or 4 blocks. But 3 or 4 blocks with a bunch of 7th graders, you know, hopped up on sugar with only 2 teachers to watch them, that's a disaster. So one of the kids was hit by a car, broke his leg, ended up in traction. You would have thought, right, that the school would have said, like, okay, we need to afford school buses, whatever, if we have to rent them, whatever. They didn't. And a few months later, another kid, my friend that I'd gone to elementary school with since we were little, he was hit by a car again, and he was killed. And that taught me at a very early age that most people simply do not think about what could go wrong, even when the evidence is right there, even when it's knocking at your door. And I could have predicted that COVID would happen just because we were at that point where we had lost the living memory of disease. You know, if COVID had hit us 20 years ago, there would have been enough people left alive who grew up in a time before vaccines. You know, you say disease to anybody who grew up like in the 20s and 30s, they remembered. You know, they remembered polio. They remembered maybe having a couple siblings that didn't make it. But most old people nowadays are baby boomers. They grew up with vaccines. So you say disease to most people nowadays, they go, yeah, something I'll get a shot for. It's not a gut memory. And I think that's always important to me. And it affects everything I write about. You know, when you talk about the zombie virus rising and how it was politicized and used different cultures, I mean, that's straight out of my childhood, because that's AIDS. You know, AIDS was a them disease for a long time. AIDS was, well, it's gay people and they're going to hell anyway. So maybe this is a good, you know, thing from God. That's what the religious right wanted. Haitian community, well, they shouldn't be in the country anyway, to hell with them. Drug users, oh, well, you know, that's their moral decay. I mean, when I was a kid, AIDS was really seen up to the White House, up to Ronald Reagan's White House, as this is God's divine punishment for the 60s. And it was only later in the 80s that people started to come together and say, we got to do this. This is wrong. We got to first say it, understand it affects everyone, and we have to fight it, because these are our loved ones. And you never know, but it could be us someday. So the early politicization of a disease is something very close to me. I lost a lot of people close to me. Lost the vice principal in my school. You know, scared 7th grader, one guy who was nice to me. I saw him a few years later, he'd look like a zombie, and then he died. So I understand on a personal level how something that should be no contest, like a disease, can suddenly become us, them.
Megan?
Wow, that's really powerful. Like a level of detail put into the thoughtfulness of the the touch points and the tying everything together historically, tying together history and fiction. So yeah, throughout the reading of this, I was definitely like, oh, this feels just like COVID. Like, and this is amazing how you had the forethought to see all these things come into fruition. My background is in public health. So this is definitely, so when you brought it up, where we are today is due to like all of the public health marvels, like putting fluoride in water, getting vaccines, what we did with cigarettes, and so this is all that I was like, yes. But tying in COVID and tying in public health and things like that. So in the beginning, we see that the virus of zombieism originates in China. Once again, that parallels COVID, which is so amazing. I kind of have a two-part question. So why did you decide to have patient zero originate in China? Was there any conscious, it was a conscious thought point process with that? And then also, why did you decline to specifically pinpoint who actually patient zero it was? Because what we get from the doctor is that the child was down there fishing with his father and was bitten. So we never really fully trace it back.
Right.
This is where it started. So why decline to reveal the specific and true patient zero or the origins of this virus?
Well, I'll start with the second part of the question first. The reason I didn't identify patient zero is because in my study of how real pandemics happen, we really don't know the actual patient zero. It's hard to pinpoint the source. We still don't know where AIDS really came from. I mean, when I was a kid, we had the story of the French-Canadian flight attendant who sort of spread it around, but that's only the one we know about. We don't really know sort of where it was starting to bubble up initially. Ebola was interesting because they determined it was coming from Katoon Cave in Kenya, and the World Health Organization went through that cave with a fine-tooth comb, never found it. So it is hard to find that. And I wanted to leave that more up to a mystery because to me that seems more realistic than like, we know it's this. Now, as far as China, that was a very, very conscious decision because I needed three things in order to make my zombie plague explode around the world. I needed a very dense population, obviously, which is, by the way, why Africa was out, because Africa is one of the most underpopulated places on our planet, number one. Number two, you needed first-rate infrastructure. So the moment someone gets it, they need to be able to jump on high-speed rail and roads and spread it. Once again, Africa's out, also Latin America. In fact, a lot of virologists are saying that, and this is something interesting, that China's getting into Africa now, building a lot of roads and airports, basically so they can take the resources out. But what's been holding back a lot of plagues in Africa is the lack of infrastructure. The idea that something would come out of the jungle into a village, it would stay in that village. Now, it could be on a plane to Beijing in 10 hours. So that was out. So I needed population, first-rate infrastructure, but this is the most important thing, is I needed a government that was willing to sit on the truth. And that's why I couldn't put it in, let's say, India or Mexico, because all you need is one intrepid reporter to break the story. You need a government that would suppress the truth long enough for the plague to spread and get out of control. And I had a template right there with SARS. The first SARS, there it was it's exploding in China. The World Health Organization is like, we got to get in there. You've got a disease. And the Chinese government is doing their impression of Eddie Murphy and Raw. Hey, wasn't me. What do you mean? We got to get, no, wasn't me. And then before you know it, it's suddenly exploding in Toronto. So that was my model, was, okay, the Chinese government clearly will not be open and honest. And they've proven it. And so I'm going to use them. And that's why my book is banned in China. And that is probably why there will not be, at least in the foreseeable future, an accurate adaptation of World War Z. Because, people ask me all the time, it would be a great series, a TV series. It would be on HBO or Netflix. Oh my God, you could do different stories from around the world. You could tie them together. And I'm like, yeah, but China's where the money is. And as long as people are, pardon my language, whoring themselves out for Chinese money, that's never going to happen. Because the Chinese government has figured out what the Soviets and the Nazis never could, which is make cheap stuff that we want. So we're willing to keep our mouths shut. And so that's why I put it in China. That's why it's never gone to China.
Well, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed because, of course, that was a question I was inevitably going to ask.
Yeah.
For no other reason than the fact that, look, I do think World War Z goes back to the George Romero, stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I just feel like the real value of fiction is when it's like Star Trek, when you're telling parables
right.
about life and values, and that's what makes it really, really click. Going back to your point about China, one of the things that impressed me, I feel like we're all Americans. Americans, of course, you have we're number one, and we don't do anything wrong, and we're American exceptionalism all the way.
Yeah.
But what I loved is that every single country in World War Z, the political systems all crumble due to the inherent flaws in it. And so one of the wonderful things that I loved, you have a segment where you have a Hollywood. Can't remember if he was a Hollywood producer or filmmaker, and there's this wonderful line. It was like, there's a word. It was Ray Elliott. He said, there's a word for that kind of lie, and the name of it is hope. And I between that and the phalanx and the false cure, I just felt like you did such a great job of showing, America's desperate need for there always to be capitalism, always to be included in every single situation. That in addition to the government's unwillingness to be honest with the American people, which unfortunately we've seen time and time again,
right?
All those things are going to merge, and in a crisis like COVID, it's going to create enough dysfunction when you desperately need government to do the thing that government's supposed to be really good at. So I guess I'm just curious about that, and the stuff that you did with Cuba, and how Cuba ends up being democratic, and of course Russia just. You spend a lot of time with the socio-political, not only these nations falling apart, but also their reformation after the end of World War Z.
Right.
So I'm really kind of fascinated, just your thought process about deconstructing and reconstructing these nations, and also where we are at the end of the book, because it's not entirely, because you do a great job of leaving a lot on the table. So it feels like a real documentary. You never hear the end. You never hear the end of the story, because in the documentary you only hear the part, and you're watching a living person, and you assume that other things happen later on. So, anyway, sorry to ramble. That's the question.
No, it's this goes back to what we talked about before. Is I wanted to see how systems react, not just individuals, and different government systems, different economic systems, because I think that different countries as a whole have things they're really good at and things they're really bad at. So specifically, one of the reasons I wrote this book as a global book was to tackle what I think America is bad at, which is being too isolationist. People, especially Europeans, like to say, America, you are imperialist. No, we're not. We're the world's first isolationist superpower. We are actually a reluctant superpower. We have all this power, but we don't want to deal with the rest of the world. And so this isolationism, this idea of that's their problem, whatever, that won't affect us. If you ask most Americans about the 1990s, it was awesome. For us, I don't think it was so awesome if you lived in Bosnia or Rwanda, but I never heard that mentioned on Friends. I wanted to make Americans understand that what is happening around the world is not isolated. Eventually, it will come to us. So we have a choice. We can either join the team called the human race and deal with these problems wherever they arise, or we can be caught unaware while our house is on fire. That's what I was trying to do. And I was trying to talk about sort of different countries, how their systems react, and which are the brittle ones that just shatter, and which are the ones that can self-correct. Because like with America, one of our I guess advantages is that we can self-correct without the whole system collapsing. That's another reason my book will never go to China, because the Chinese government model is either perfection or nothing. They can't self-correct. They can't have elections. I mean, look at COVID. I like to say that, you know, Xi Jinping let COVID out, but Donald Trump let it in. Now, the difference is we got rid of Donald Trump, but the poor Chinese people are still stuck with Xi Jinping. So I wanted to talk about how each country might adapt. Like Cuba, Cuba's actually kind of in the position America was in World War II. While the rest of the world was burning, we were the safe zone. And we got all the best and the brightest immigrants who came and like built us the atom bomb. And that was kind of Cuba. They were already in a siege mentality, and they were ready to repel an invasion anyway. But instead, what they got were hardworking immigrants who helped build the country. And so they had an evolution. So Cuba is actually the default winner of the zombie war. You know, likewise, you have countries that have sort of simmering issues that explode in conflict. It's why I talk about the Israeli civil war. Because as a Jew, I can tell you from an insider's point of view, in Israel, there's most of the Israelis are not religious. And in fact, it's a functioning democracy. There's 6 Arab political parties, but there is a small group of very hardcore religious right Jews there. And so far, it hasn't come to a head. But I wanted to have it come to a head when Israel decides to abandon Jerusalem. Strategically, you can't hold. You've got to shorten your lines. But the religious fanatics go crazy. And that's also the unexpected things about what can happen in war. Like, you would expect an Arab-Israeli conflict. You wouldn't expect an inter-Israeli conflict. You would expect a nuclear war between India and Pakistan. The nuclear war in my book is between Pakistan and Iran, specifically because those two countries don't expect to have a nuclear war, so they don't have the communication to shut it down. You know, like right now, if India and Pakistan were ever creeping towards a nuclear war, I guarantee you there's a hotline where the two leaders of those two countries can call each other and they can shut it down. But Iran and Pakistan, they don't have a hotline. So things can spiral out of control. You know, countries are like people, strengths, weaknesses. And I wanted to go into those details.
Last question before I kick it to Shan. I thought that you had a really great moment when I think the world's first coming together, they're first starting to have negotiations, and it's the inability of the global north and the global south to be able to communicate with each other. And right. I mean, look, as an African American, I was just like, oh wow. I was like, because it's the references to colonialism, and you know, the established powers can't possibly accept it, and they're like, oh, so again, I know you talked a lot about systems. The question I wanted to talk to you for a second about was religion, because I thought what you did with the Russian priest was one of the most interesting things I've read in a long time. Because I'm a deacon's grandson, and I grew up in the church. The idea that the role of the priesthood in the Holy Russian Empire is their souls are damned so that others aren't. And I just thought it's funny. I guess as a religious person, it was one of the most religious things I've read in a long time, because I was like, you know, the criticism of the criticism of, especially of religion in the United States, is that it's all commercialized. Like, you know, you're going to church to feel good, not to improve who you are as a human being. And I just felt like, in a strange way, it kind of validated the importance of religion and the real value of it. So if you could just kind of touch on your thought process on that.
Yeah, I talk about religion as sort of a kind of energy, not inherently good or bad. It's all how it's used. You know, it can be used to unite people. It can be used to bring peace. Likewise, it can be used to divide and make war. It's all depending on, you know, how it's used. And so with Russia, you know, I was in Russia in the 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed. And there was just a void. They had nothing. They didn't have communism anymore. And so they were waiting for America to come in and rebuild them like we did with Germany and Japan. But we didn't care. You know, this is the 90s. We had more important things. There were naked people on our computers. So we were busy. So they languished. And what I know of Russian culture and Russian history is they respect strength. And so they went back to the old model, which is the czar, but appointed by God, because that was the divine right of kings. The idea, the king, and it was all through Europe too, the idea of the king being, listen, I don't want this job, but God told me I have to be the king. So I mean, you're going to question God? I'm not going to question God. So I guess I have to be the king. And so that's so I went back to that model. And I can even see it. I saw when I was in the Ukraine in the 90s, the first thing they started to rebuild were the old churches that had been ruined by communism. And you could all, because their religion was also very much part of their history and their heritage. And I started to see actually in Russia a little bit of a back and forth, because when the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of American missionaries tried to get in there. And the Russian Orthodox Church was like, hey, this is our way of looking at God. And so I thought in a zombie crisis, this would be something that could unite them. And also something that their new czar could be like, yes, and he wants me to speak for you.
Shan?
Okay, so I kind of wanted to talk about the power of media and how you address that in the book. So I love the part when the guy was making the films about helping the rates of ADS to lessen, when the people who just felt like they couldn't deal with what was happening just decided, well, not decided, like something mentally switched, and they were like, you know, I can't beat them, so I'm going to join them. I'm a zombie now. Right. I found it interesting that filmmaker couldn't get any support in making those films. And even after it was proven to be helpful in lowering the rates of ADS, like it still took some time before he was able to even like, you know, build a team and able to like really take that further. And he still really never got any governmental support or anything like that. But I felt like, and I could be wrong, but I felt like that it was so different from what we actually are dealing with. I feel like government leans heavily on media to influence things, and especially if they find that, you know, a movie is having favorable results like this, they're going to pour money into it. And I understand that, you know, given the situation, there were not a lot of resources, but I felt like that would be seen as something important enough to invest in. So why'd you make the choice for like government to not help him at all, and for people to basically suppress the fact that they were even showing this film?
You know, I went for this because I've been studying for many years sort of the American government's relation to media. And after Vietnam and after Watergate, we started actually to put up all these laws about how we couldn't produce propaganda films anymore. And you could see why that was well-intentioned because of Vietnam. The idea we're winning, and guys would come back and be like, we're not winning. So I understand sort of why they did that. But the problem is, I wrote this book in the early stages of Iraq and Afghanistan when America had lost the ability to tell stories. But our enemies were just eating us for breakfast. You were getting these Al-Qaeda videos that were coming out every day almost, that were telling these amazing narratives. And yet we weren't fighting back with images, with words, with true stories. I mean, to this day, I don't understand, you know, because Al-Qaeda wanted to have the idea that America hates Muslims. And yet the war we just fought between Iraq and Afghanistan, before that, was in Bosnia, where we literally were bombing Christians to protect Muslims. So where was that story? How had we lost this idea? You know, how had we lost the idea to make movies about American Muslims serving in the US Army? You know, that I think for the first time, a chaplain at the division level was a Muslim in the US Army. Where was that? So we lost all this. We gave it to the private sector, which doesn't care about anything except making money. So I wanted this guy Spielberg, he's Spielberg, I can say it, to go back to the US government and be like, listen, people are dying of ennui. They're dying of just giving up. Let me reinvigorate them. Let me give them hope. And the Army was like, yeah, we have better things to do. We have to blow stuff up. So, because that's actually a problem I really have encountered in Army circles, working at my think tank in West Point and in this other government think tank I'm part of, is there really is almost no interest in storytelling anymore. And we got to get that back. And it doesn't have to be propaganda if it's true. You know, there's so much we can believe in this country. But if we don't harness this, we're going to surrender to cynicism. And it's just something I really believed in. That's why that chapter was so important to me.
Megan?
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, the theme of media throughout the book, just kind of seeing, you know, we get to see in a lot of the themes, we get to see, like you said, you wanted to show the positives and the negatives, how things can, you know, depending on the sway of the person that's in charge or in power, how, you know, it can be a time for unity or a time for discord.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting. One thing I don't think we really got to touch on are the characters themselves. I kind of want to ask questions about the characters themselves. Specifically, overwhelmingly, the point of views that we got were male. And obviously, you are male. I'm assuming that you're male. If you're not, please let me know. I do not want to misgender or anything like that.
Dude.
Yeah. You're male presenting, so I assumed, but I shouldn't assume. I should always ask first. But the point of views were overwhelmingly male.
Yeah.
What was the reason for that? You know, because we do get a few women in the stories, and we get to see them as mothers, you know, or protecting the young, or in some cases killing them, thinking that it was, you know, protecting them. And then we do get the chapter on the fighter pilot. Yeah, it's a fighter pilot. So, you know, why were the point of views overwhelmingly male? And the women that you did choose to have in the story, have in their narratives, why did you choose them in those particular roles?
You know, I think I didn't think about as much as I probably should have, honestly. You know, I'm coming from my story, which is being a guy. You know, and then as a guy writing, I probably unconsciously just write guys. But then shifting it to women as well, as like my fighter pilot character, that would take effort. Where I remember actually thinking of like, yeah, I've got to make more of my characters female. But if I were to go back now, I probably would make it a little more balanced. But honestly, I did not think about it at the time, given who I was at the time. And that's the thing, you know, you grow as a writer. The things that you write in your 20s or 30s, you don't write when you're in your late 40s, approaching your 50s. I mean, it's like with Harlem Hellfighters now, it's important for me to grow. And I probably wouldn't, like what we said, I would not have thought of it if you hadn't said, well, there were women, weren't there? And I thought about it. And it's also, I think, the way you said it, like I said before, because I got criticized before, but usually like a woman studies student at a book signing that said, we went through every page of World War Z and we've discovered there aren't enough. Boo! And to which case I just get defensive. I think I still have growing to do as a writer. I hope so. I mean, I hope to be around a few more decades at least, and I hope to keep growing. And I hope to keep including voices that I would not normally have put myself in. I think that's part of growth, is you get older, you meet new people, you expand your world, and you go, oh, yeah, there's a whole group of individuals or a way of thinking, a way of feeling. Because it doesn't have to be just gender. You know, it has to be about different psychologies, different hearts, different minds. And that's what I hope comes from the growth of an artist.
Let's stay there for a second, because Megan, this is how much you and I think alike. I was literally getting ready to go there because I was like, oh, we got to talk about Colonel Christina Eliopoulos. I will say selfishly, without her in the book, I think World War Z is good. With her in the book, I think World War Z is great. And I mean, and I think because out of all, she is the single most memorable character to me in the entire book. She's the only character that we really get a chance to appreciate her strength, her fear, her skill, her intelligence, and her perspective. Like I love at the end of her story, it doesn't matter whether or not Met's fan was real or not. It doesn't matter whether or not it was a figment of her imagination. And I just thought, I mean, look, in a book that, you know, could have been a very straightforward socio-political analysis of zombies and systems crashing, that and your use of the dogs in the back, I thought were two of the big things that gave readers an emotional connection to the book that they might not have had. Because I started off the first part of the book laughing when all the celebrities get eaten, and I was like, hey, that's capitalism for you. It's like, it's nice to know that the real world and Big Brother, like, you know, they're gonna get hit with the zombie plague too with everybody else. But if you could spend some time just talking about just your development of the Colonel as a character and just her thought process, because I as a budding writer, that's the type of example I look at in terms of, you know, you really kind of can't do surface level writing. You really have to kind of think and contemplate and go to an idea and come back to it. So,
well, you know, my characters are all based on real people. Like Megan, you'd said before about the moms killing their own kids. That's a true story. That was on the island of Okinawa when Japanese soldiers would tell the Okinawans that the Americans were coming to kill their children and rape them and eat them. And so the honorable thing as a good parent would be to murder your children first before the Americans get them. And that really happened. So that's what I base that on. And as far as Christina Eliopoulos, she's an amalgam of several characters. Her name comes from a girl I went to school with. Because you know when you're a little kid and you're with other little kids, and there's always that one kid who's like 20 years more mature than you. That was this girl. And if you remember my blind Japanese guy talking about how his boss started to enunciate very clearly when he got nervous, that was my Latin teacher. And I thought he was just a weirdo because, you know, I'm in 8th grade. But Mariamne Eliopoulos sitting next to me, she turns to me and she goes, I think he had a speech impediment as a kid. How would you know that? So it's a combination of her and a real Air Force colonel who I'm friends with, a woman who I know, who I've known, God, for 20 years. So she was my template. In fact, she was the one where I asked her once, do C-130s have toilets? And she's like, some do, some don't. That character I wanted to be the epitome of adaptation, right? Because her whole skill set is obsolete. Like, imagine to be a woman, to be trained to be a fighter pilot in combat, what you had to do, right? The river of feces you had to swim through to get to that top, to earn those wings. And then suddenly that job, no one cares. Suddenly the job that you now have to do is be a bus driver, essentially, flying supplies back and forth. So I wanted her character to really talk about how some skills just go away and you better adapt. Then she gets shot down or she has to bail out. And then she really has to adapt because now she's prey. And what does that mean? So that was a chance for me to really sort of go deep into someone's personality and put myself in their shoes and be like, what is it like? Oh my God, I'm behind enemy lines. And the moment the enemy smells me, they're all coming for me and they will never stop.
So speaking of this character, the way you ended her section, I sat and thought about that for so long. So why did you make that choice? How did you come up with that? Because I was not expecting it. And her part was already so great, like Armand said, but for them to call her sanity into question in the end, and like, did this woman who was helping her through this, through her ordeal ever even exist? They never found her. They never found this cabin. I'm just like, what a choice. Like, where did that come from?
Well, you know, it comes from her personality because fighter pilots tend to be lone wolves. You kind of have to be. To be a woman, to rise through the Air Force Academy, to fly F-22s, you have to be supremely self-sufficient, right? And I thought she'd be the kind of character who wouldn't want to depend on anybody. because she knew in that level of competition, everyone's trying to stab you in the back. So her attitude is like, I got me, and that's all I need. But suddenly she's behind enemy lines. And there's a part of her subconscious that knows she can't do it alone, even if it means hearing a voice on a radio. Whether that voice is real or not, we don't know. But the point of that is the point of the book, which is nobody fights alone and nobody survives alone. We all need each other, even if our brain has to create another person to hold our hand and pull us out of the raging waters.
A lot of our PCU teammates have they're all pet parents. So I'd be remiss if I didn't raise this. The dogs.
True story. True story.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, look, it was just fantastic, and again, some of the personal flourishes that you put in, the story about the one handler who they weren't gonna let her go save her dog, and she shot her commanding officer, and again, it added a lot. But so why did you include the section on dogs? And I guess a companion question: you chose to make your zombies very differently. Because these zombies or traditional zombies, I eat brains. You have your zombies willing to eat almost anything and everything. Yeah. And so I guess really the larger question is the use of animals in the story and your decision making behind it.
Well, first off, yeah, with the animals, I wanted to make the zombies just eat everything. I wanted them because in my mind, the virus is programmed to spread. And the virus doesn't understand what it's spreading to. It has an urge, which is, in my mind, that's why zombies eat. It's not to gain nourishment, it's to bite. The act of biting is the most primitive act in our brains. Even as little babies, we're doing that. So I thought the virus, while it melts the frontal brain that makes us human, it keeps the crocodile brain and uses that crocodile brain to spread the virus. And as long as if you're living, it will try to spread that virus through the bite. And so that's why I have them just devouring the world. And that's why I have, the turtle, when that character finds a turtle, it's like, they're like unicorns at this point. They couldn't get away. Or the golden mole, when our guy in the space station sees the mole trying to dig for its life and gets away. But as far as the dogs, that's based on a true story. Before I wrote this book, a friend of mine is working on a documentary called War Dogs about dogs in Vietnam. And she interviewed all the combat vets and what that was like to be in heavy combat in Vietnam with your dog that would sort of sniff out the VC or sniff out landmines or security at Air Force bases. And for me, the heartbreak of the documentary was, and this is true, when we left Vietnam, we decided to leave all our equipment with the Vietnamese. So, and you just left them, your tanks and your planes and your ammo, and the dogs were classified as equipment. So the documentary ends with these veterans just sobbing because these are their partners. And suddenly their partners are just left behind because some bureaucrat in the Pentagon didn't know the difference between a living creature and a roll of spare tires. And so I wanted that to be critical. I wanted that to be so important that the dog, because I grew up with dogs. They're really important to me and they're important to us. And it is true. I learned this, that there is no greater interspecies bond than Homo sapiens and canines. And so we've learned to come together to fight this threat. So I wanted that story to be all about the heart, because why else would you have a dog?
I gotta tell you, one of the things I enjoy the most about talking with you is I am very encouraged by the fact that how involved you are with the American military and government, because in my day job, I'm a lawyer for the federal government, and a lot of the issues that you're raising are the morality and ethics and long-term thinking about who are we and who do we want to be, that matter. And I think that's what really takes World War Z to a unique place. We're almost out of time. You've been incredibly gracious. I do want to say, one, how do you feel when people tell you that World War Z sits next to 1984 in terms of being one of the best pieces of predictive fiction? And the reason why I say that is, here's the list of things that you got right: commercial space flight, which no one was really talking about. I read that and I was like, I forgot. It wasn't even a thing in 2006. The false cures, the level of deception on behalf of the government, the propaganda, the Chinese government not being willing to share information, the fact that the global, all of it. The list of things you got right is so large that one of the things I was thinking about reading it, I was like, I really hope somebody's got him on a red team someplace. So that whenever they're disaster planning, I'm hoping that they've got him around to consult.
Well, I wish I could say I predicted all this, but the truth is I just borrowed from history. Everything in this book has already happened, and history just repeats. It just goes in cycles. So it's not like I had to make anything up. All I had to do was look at where we've been to sort of see where we're going. And, as far as working with the government and the military, it always gives me hope because, especially now in this country, we're all living in our little bubbles and we don't mix with each other anymore. And so for me to get out of my bubble and work with people gives me hope because they know how big the challenges are. And for me, they're the embodiment of America, because for me, the American story is setting a group of ideals right here in 1776 while we're still here in 1776. So the American story is not a perfect union. It's trying to get to a more perfect union. And it usually doesn't go like this. It goes like, that to me is the American story. But also I've lived and worked around the world. And a lot of countries don't have that. A lot of countries don't have this notion of like, we can do better. We can be better. As long as there's breath in our body, we can't stop. We've got to hold on to these ideals and find ways to fight for them. Because some countries, especially the ones we're in conflict right now, China doesn't have that. If I was going to have 4 slides of us versus them, I would have slide number 1 would be George Floyd. And I'd say, here's who we are, with the boot on the neck. And then I would go to Derek Chauvin and say, but here's who we want to be. Then I would show Tiananmen Square, the guy facing those tanks. I'd say, here's who they are. And then I'd show the exact same photo and say, here's who they want to be. So we talk a lot in World War Z about different countries having strengths and weaknesses. And America, God, do we have weaknesses? Wow. Our history is getting sucker punched, and if there's a party, we are always late to it. Wow, are we late to it? I get a lot of interviews from Europeans about sort of what shocks me about the global response to COVID. And I go, I expected us to screw it up. What's your excuse? So I get it. But what always gives me hope is that there's always enough Americans to say, we must and will do better. And as a student of history, looking at American history, we are continuing, and it sometimes doesn't look that way, but it is continuing to move forward. So of all our flaws, our need to be better is what makes me proud to be an American.
Did not think we were going to have a moment of patriotism on this, but it worked out perfect. Megan, we're running out of time, but I want to make sure you and Shan have a chance to ask any closing questions. So go ahead.
No, I have 2 things. So the first thing is definitely like when we were discussing the women and trying to get your perspective on the choices that you made for whom you included. I do want to reference that this also happened with those who were enslaved and they were escaping. We've heard accounts that they would drown sometimes their children or kill them in different ways to prevent them from being discovered. And actually, I don't know if you've read it. I also want to definitely suggest Beloved by Toni Morrison. And that really gets into kind of that. And that novel was actually based on historical research that she did. I believe the enslaved person's, or formerly enslaved person's name was Margaret Garner. She was an enslaved person from Kentucky. So I would definitely suggest reading that because it touches on, that's something that happens in the story. That's not a spoiler because like I said, it's based on history. But just the psychological effects of that, having to deal with, you know, making that sacrifice, that tough choice, like my freedom or my child. It's like, you know, as a mother, that's nothing that you ever want to ever have to make a choice on. And how ironic that my son is actually giggling right now. So, you know, it's something tough. And all of us here, all four of us actually are parents.
Oh,
so
yeah.
To read that and to get into psychology of that, you know, that's amazing. So I do want to suggest that. And then I know that we're running on time. And then, you know, this has been a phenomenal novel. I've recommended it to my significant other. I'm gonna have him read. He doesn't like to read. He always teases me. He's like, you're trying to make me literate. And I'm like, yes, I like all of those that are in my harem to be literate. That's what I want. So if we could possibly talk about your most recent novel, which is called Evolution, which is the firsthand account of the Rainier Sasquatch Massacre. And just, I mean, obviously we don't want spoilers because we haven't picked it up yet. That's the next thing I'm going to read. But if there's anything that you would like to share with us, discuss with us as we're anticipating it, because like I said, I'm getting that probably tomorrow. I'm going to start reading.
Well, I'll tell you
shameless plug, of course.
Yep, thank you. This goes right back to the very beginning of our conversation. Fear, right? I write about things that scare me. And when I was a kid, Sasquatch terrified me. And so I've been wanting to write this book for a long time. So the premise is there's an eco community called Green Loop. And I don't mean some like hippie commune. I mean, this is like high tech, high end. This is drone deliveries. These are eco homes with solar panels. They're smart homes. They know when to cool a room, how not to cool a room, electric cars. And because they're wired into the world, this is a telecommuter bedroom community. So it's like a brand new model where like upwardly mobile, well-to-do professionals can live anywhere in the world but be connected to their work. And they're nestled at the foot of the Cascade Mountains. And it's a lovely life. You know, you get up, you do your little meeting, you go to work, and then you go for a walk in the wilderness, you tap your phone, a drone comes in from Seattle and drops off your quinoa. And things are just lovely. Until Mount Rainier erupts and they are cut off. And these highly educated, highly paid David Sedaris fans don't know how to change a light bulb. And winter is coming. And if that's not bad enough that they're trapped with no drone deliveries, because they're not just trapped, they're forgotten because the volcano blows out towards Seattle. So nobody's looking for them. They're outside the disaster zone. And if that's not bad enough, the eruption has also driven a pack of very large, very hungry Sasquatch creatures out of their traditional hunting grounds. And it's fall, right? Winter's coming. They got to stack up on calories. And they're not good and they're not evil. They're not monsters. They're just animals looking for food. And they come up against this community, this pen of sheep. So if I was going to boil my book down to like just a tagline, it would be Fran Lebowitz and Ira Glass fight Bigfoot.
Oh, great. That's so funny that, you know,
that's gotta be one of the most memorable things I've heard in a long time. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
And then I was going to say, you know, that also ties into World War Z. And it's something that we didn't get to really talk on, which is the classism. How we see a lot of the roles reversed and flipped, especially when we were speaking about Cuba. And even in America, it was like a lot of the people who, like, there was that one scene where the lady, she was like, I think she was like the
creative executive,
a high class agent or something like that. And she was like, Magda, I don't want to hear this. And it was like, come to find out, Magda was once her cleaning person. And now she has to take instruction from her, and how like we've become so highly individualized, and we're at this post-industrial point in our lives. It's highly, informational technology based in machinery and things like that, and computers, and how none of that matters.
Right.
When it really counts. You have to have these these skills that will keep you, that you can survive. Because it definitely made me like, all right, I have to step up my doomsday prep.
Yes.
Because one of the things that I said to my friend was that, and this was a quote that I gave to my friend, the thing about this book is that it was terrifyingly and eerily horrifying in its plausibility.
Yes.
And I think that's what's always the scariest thing, is the stuff that can possibly happen. Not the fantastic,
right.
You got like, a Cthulhu monster coming from out of the skies. It's what happens when your neighbor come to find out is a serial rapist. How do you deal with that very real and palpable feel and fear? And, to toot your horn, of course, like reading this, it terrified me to read it after dark because it was very real, like the scariness that can be at your door. And when you said what you said about being fearful, like of Sasquatches when you were younger, it made me think of my all-time favorite author in this world. I'm pro-Black everything. I'm not gonna lie. I'm rooting for everybody Black, but I cannot lie and say that my favorite author is the GOAT, Stephen King. And he will tell you like what drives him to write a lot of his books and a lot of the ideas that he's come up with, because that man is a sheer genius. He's very verbose, because a lot of his books are like 1,000 pages and really it could have been like 300. But one of the things that he'll say is that his childhood has always driven a lot of his storytelling. Like he'll tell this story about being a kid and he's, older than dirt. So when he was growing up in Maine, like his father would tell him not to go downstairs in the basement because there's a velociraptor downstairs. And he would see like the coal furnace, like, with coal furnaces, you'll see them glowing and it looks like it's a monster. And that very palpable fear is the undercurrent of what drives him to do his storytelling.
Yeah.
And I read Joe Hill too, Lock and Key. I highly suggest. Such a great comic. But Stephen King is my favorite. And honestly, reading World War Z, I felt that same fear when I was reading Needful Things or maybe Gerald's Game or any of the other stuff. So you're quickly rising to the top of my list of one of my favorite authors. So that is a definite compliment because like I said, I'm all Black everything. So, that's a compliment. You should definitely take that. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm always here for the truth. So this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. I would love to talk to you again, even if it's just to talk crap. I don't care. Like, we would love to have you back.
Why are you taking all of my lines? Why are you taking all of my lines?
I was excited, and Armand was like, Max specifically mentioned you in the email. I was like, yo, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, so you can talk all that trash now. For the record, when they saw the outline for tonight's show, they were like, Armand, for the love of God, can't you at least just put cliff notes? And I was like, I thought I was being nice because I didn't put page numbers on. I'm specifically referencing, page 159 in regards to Roy Elliott.
I was going to do that. I'm not going to lie. I was like, because I was going to put Post-its in my book. And
Okay. So you
and
and I
this point, because I didn't want to forget anything, but I was like, I want to keep it organic. I want to keep it conversational rather than like, I know you probably get 1,000,001 requests from, interviewers and it's more formal. I wanted the spirit of us at PCU is conversational. We're speaking with people. We're trying to reach people and have that human element, which is something that is the undercurrent of your books, the human element. So I wanted to keep it in that.
Well, speaking of the human element, our other human, Shan, Shan, you have any closing questions you wanted to ask?
Not so much closing questions, but the last topic we were talking about was the class differences. And not only did I think your depiction of how like things just totally flip-flopped with from all these highly specialized professionals, like all of a sudden being now they have to be the blue collar workers. Like I thought that was great because that is something that can definitely happen. But I feel like it is kind of happening because we have all these people with this highly specialized education, but there's not necessarily jobs for all these people. But my
Yep.
favorite, I think my favorite depiction of like the class issues in the book was the house with all the celebrities in it, and that was all highly fortified, and their decision to broadcast this everywhere, and then
Yep.
being surprised when people overran the house. Like I just thought that was so just like I definitely can see something like that happening in any sort of disaster situation.
Well, you know, Shannon, that comes from my dad. That story came from my dad because my dad grew up in the 30s. My dad grew up in the Depression. And so he always said to me, you know, the funny thing is in his movie, The Producers, he has If You Got It, Flaunt It, which is the opposite of how he lived and how he taught me to live. You know, he drove me to school every day in his 1982 Honda Accord. And he always used to say, it's fine to make a fortune in this country, but you should never drive your fortune past people who are starving. And he said that for two reasons. Number one is obviously morality, because he grew up without a dad with three brothers, barely getting by. He had his four back teeth ripped out by the dentist because it was cheaper to tear them out than to fill them. 50 cents to tear, $1 to pull. But also, as important, and my mom was this way too, was they both grew up in the Depression. And their attitude was if you show people that you have something they want, somebody will try to take it from you. That was really important in our family. So like my mom, when I was a little boy one time, my mom gave me a wallet with a few dollars and we're at the store and I took out my wallet, started counting the money and she smacked my hand. She goes, don't ever count your money in public. This notion that you must never flaunt your wealth because then you're a target. Now, but that, remember, they're Depression parents and I'm a Gen Xer, so we skipped a generation. The baby boomers after them were all about flaunting it. And this culture that we live in now is all about showing what you have, even if you can't afford it. And so I took my dad's attitude of like, yeah, this culture of look at me, MTV Cribs or whatever, you know, or the Kardashians, look at my house. I would always watch those shows and think somebody's going to target you. So that is very personal. That comes from that. And as far as class system, I mean, growing up in LA, I mean, there's East LA, there's West LA. If somehow the Q were to pick up LA and separate it and put two halves on either side of Antarctica and come back in a year, East LA, they might be a little frozen and, you know, whatever, but they would make it because they know how to do everything. That's the part of LA that comes to West LA at 8 a.m. and does everything. Everybody in West LA would be dead. We'd be witty and we could do a hell of a contract dispute. You know, we could line item a contract and get you some extra deal points, but everybody in West LA would be dead in a year. So it wasn't hard for me writing it to see the class distinctions in LA.
And yeah, other than that, I just want to also say that I really, really enjoyed the book for lots of different reasons. I'm definitely going to read it again. And I'm looking forward to getting your most recent book and reading that too. And I'm really thankful that you came and chopped it up with us today. And hopefully you'll come back. We'll get to talk about the next book and whatever else comes up.
Yeah, my kids are Minecraft fans, so I mean, so we will absolutely have to have a Minecraft conversation because I will say I am enthralled with how you go from devolution and World War Z and the zombie survival guide, and then you're like, let's do something like let's do Minecraft. I mean, I didn't even think of you in that vein until I was literally walking in Barnes & Noble one day, and I was like, is that Max Brooks' name on a Minecraft? It's got to be a different Max Brooks, right? I will say the one thing I did not appreciate about World War Z as a lawyer, I did not appreciate the fact that there was no, that you always need a lawyer. That you always need a lawyer.
And that's the thing with LA. We got a lot of lawyers in West LA. None of them are practical lawyers. None of them are like criminal or economic. I mean, it's all like, you know, it's well, we got to figure out this celebrities deal memo.
Yeah, I was also an intellectual property attorney, so thank you.
There you go.
Just stab me up.
Yes.
Start off being a public defender and whatnot, and I was doing good. Yeah. Well, on an entirely different show, we'll have a conversation about how Armand's trying to get back to where he started, back being a public defender again. But look, love having you on the show. Love just talking with you and love your perspective on stuff. So I have never said this before to any human being. but you are welcome to come on whenever you feel like you would.
Yes.
Whether you're promoting something, you're teaching a class, whether you're in between projects and you just want to give your take on stuff, absolutely love having you on, because there are very few people who I think have your background who are as thoughtful, as well-read, as intelligent, and to be perfectly honest, humble, because it did not escape, I think, the three of us that you were perfectly fine till I said the New York Times best-selling, and you were like, oh. So, I mean, you can fake false humility. Real humility actually shows through. So really appreciate you. Always enjoy talking with you. And yeah, we gotta get you back on Devolution. So, I mean, when you've got some time later on in the year, absolutely feel free to shoot us a message and we'll have you back in a heartbeat.
Yes, definitely to do the new novel. I definitely want to talk about that. I'm sure I'm going to have some questions and feel.
Really?
Yeah, you who knew? Who knew? And you have my contact information, so you can always reach out. I am available for more consultant work. I'm here.
Your significant other, if they don't want to read the audiobooks, like I said.
No, he's going to read. No.
Okay. Okay.
He's going to read.
Oh, well, I mean, if you ever need to figure out how to write a strong Black female character, I can think of one example that you might be able to leverage to inform your.
I mean, project. I'm here for consulting work.
Yes. Yeah.
He has my email. Reach out. I'm here. Even to ask a simple question. I don't care. I'm here.
Lord have mercy. Well, hey, for everybody on Facebook who's joining us, for everybody who's going to watch it later on, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate you. And Mr. Brooks, we hope we'll talk to you again sometime soon in the future. So,
I look forward.
Likewise. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. You take care.
You too.
Peace.